James, welcome to the show. How are you this morning?
I'm good. It's good to see you, Eric. It's good to be together.
Absolutely. Why don't you do a quick intro for the people, kind of who you are and what you do and what your company does. And then we'll just hop into the rest of it. I'm excited to learn more about the company and all the stuff that you guys got going on because it's kind of I think you've been the guest that's been almost most aligned with the podcast in a strange way because we're both sharing stories. But I'll let you do the intro and then we'll hop into the rest of it.
100%. Well, my name's James Warren. I'm the founder and CEO of Share More Stories. Share More Stories is a human experience research company. And what that basically means is we use storytelling and a lot of technology to develop insights into people's experiences inside companies, with brands, and in the community. And we do that primarily through our tool called the SEEQ Platform. SEEQ stands for Stories to Engage, Explore, and Question. And you could say I've been on a journey, and our team's been on a journey for a long time to explore, in fact, what kind of the more interesting parts of people's lives and experiences are, and how to help leaders and companies do something more meaningful and impactful with that kind of insight.
Yeah, 100%. So the question is, and I think this actually might be a good segue into the rest of the conversation, but um, it is what was going on in your life when you had your best performance ever? And it can be athletic or not. The person that asked is a sports psychologist, so that's what she was going for, but
Wow.
um, can be performance can be defined loosely.
That's a great question, and there are a lot of ways to define that. A lot of moments that come into my mind, and I know by saying best, I'm probably dissing some version of some experience, but one of the ones that's at least the most memorable, most impactful to me. Um, my freshman year of college, I was on the crew team, rowing team. I had not been a rower in high school. And in college, they tended to both recruit rowers who had rowed in high school and then recruit novices who, maybe they were tall and broad shouldered and looked quasi athletic, and they're like, you could be a rower. So I happened to be walking by the gym freshman week at college, and I saw this table with really cool gear. They had the dopest rowing sweatshirts, like Princeton heavyweight crew. I was like, that looks amazing. And like, how do I get one of those? Like, you got to work for it. You can come on down to the boathouse and join the team. And I was like, oh, okay. And that first year, I only rode for at school for a year and a half. It was transformational for me, and it culminated. Even though I thought about quitting more than once. I think I even walked away for like half of a practice and came back. The culmination was at the end of that season. We were racing for an undefeated season, and I just remember the feeling with only like 300 meters to go. It's a 2,000-meter race. We were what you call a seat down on the other leading boat. And I just remember the feeling when all of us dug in and our coxswain is, telling us take up the stroke, go faster, pull harder. Because at that point, you got nothing left to do but to go get it, to go take it. And the elation when we crossed that line ahead of that other boat, I I haven't really felt that specific feeling at any other time in my life. I felt a lot of other amazing achievements in family, in business, in my personal life. That one is unique and it's specific. It's not better than the others. It's just unique. I've never felt it in any other context. And so for me, that the togetherness, the teamwork, the the stress of the moment, the pressure of the moment, the you're trying to do two things, like just row, but you're also trying to like find if there's something in your brain that you could tap into to row just a little bit harder. And honestly, one of the things that I would tap into is my job is not to hit the person in front of me with my oar. That means I got to pull faster. I got to pull harder. My job is not to be the one who screws us by my oar getting stuck in the water. And I've used that lesson my whole life since that day. I really, really deeply believe and understand when people talk about teamwork, I get it. For me, that was teamwork. Like 9 people 8 of them rowers, one coxswain, with the same exact goal, not just going in the same direction, but having to do it in the same way, same cadence, a level of perfection for a brief moment. I love it. You
Yeah.
got me charged up because I
Yeah.
just
So, what
that's
was
my erg right
going
there in the background.
So, in terms of like your personal life at that point, because what she goes for with this question is like, as a sports psychologist, she goes for like, um, in your personal life, was everything aligned? So oftentimes people say like family relationship was good, school was good, like good relationship with the teammates, et cetera, et cetera. Was that the same for you, or was it more running off the like you mentioned? It's interesting that you mentioned not being the guy that lets the teammates down because it's almost like an element of fear, and I would imagine that that gets stressful at some point.
It's good. And yes, it's to that. So um I would say, especially looking back, because I've done a lot of reflection as I've gotten older. I'm a big proponent of therapy. I love therapy. So, therapy and writing and just trying to be a better human, a better father, husband, leader, teammate, community member. I just want to be a better version of myself. And so I do a lot of reflection. And I look back on that time of my life and I realize in lots of ways, things were not aligned. I didn't realize how much the trauma of my youth was really impacting my early, my sort of young adulthood. I didn't process it because I was in the middle of it. Looking back, I'm like, damn, in some cases it's like a miracle I was able to get through some of those things. And so I think for me, what was happening around me, whether I was conscious of it or subconscious of it, my own mistakes, other people's decisions impacting my life, just, some challenges and struggles. That moment, though, was a refuge from that. It was kind of like you could shut everything else out. And I felt that way that whole time rowing, not just that moment when we won. I felt that way every time we got on the water. I felt like that was break from everything else. Sometimes you didn't even, nobody talked. You just heard water, you heard the oars, there's the oar lock, so you hear the kind of the rhythm, and you just get into it. And it's still, I was just at my college reunions, and a lot of our teammates were there, and we just reminisced a lot about those moments, moments I've forgotten about, but the camaraderie and the bond, even 30 years later, is still there. And I didn't know if it was still there because honestly, I felt like, you know, some of those guys stayed and rode all 4 years, and I didn't. And it just reminded me that when you have those kind of not just intense moments, but in my experience, intense moments together, um, it sits different. It stays in the memory different, and you can go back to it. So, yeah, it's funny you asked this because I was just reliving these moments less than 10 days ago.
Wow. That's when you mentioned kind of like the sound of the water or the oarlock, it's almost like you're doing like an active meditation for lack of a better phrase. You're able to clear your mind. I know for myself, sometimes sitting still and trying to do something like that is like borderline impossible. So for me, it's a soccer field is like it's a little bit different, or for some people, it's swimming or running.
Yeah,
Um, okay, so I want to flip the script on you a little bit. You share other
yeah.
people's stories, so we're going to share yours a little bit today. Um, so growing up, we spoke on the phone about kind of your upbringing a little bit, and I want to start there from the standpoint of what were some of the challenges that you had to deal with? What were some of the things that maybe for somebody who has not experienced that sort of upbringing, like the difficulties and what it was like for you, and I'll kind of leave it open-ended there and you can take it where you want, but I want to start with that because one of the things that you mentioned on the phone that I thought was super interesting was that like you don't want anyone else to have to go through that, but also it made you who you are and you've become very successful. So like there's a little bit of a not necessarily I don't know if contradiction is the right word, paradox maybe is a better word
Yeah,
for it. But so
yeah. Yeah.
I'll leave it open-ended and I'll let you go and then I'll ask if I've got other kind of things I want to dig into, but I want to start there and then we can kind of go from there.
Thank you for that invitation. I think on a broad level, before I get into the weeds, I think we all have different versions of struggle. I really believe that. And so I think sometimes we get caught up in comparing our struggles and, oh, my struggle was a lot worse than yours, or you didn't have to go through what I went through. And there are definitely people in my community and my family, my life, and people I know who've had some struggles. And I'm like, I wouldn't want that, like that's a lot. And there's also other people's versions of struggle that I don't understand or relate to. So I kind of approach it in general by saying, look, we're all going through stuff. Sometimes what I'm going through is really, really hard. And sometimes what you're going through is really, really hard. And sometimes maybe what a whole group of people is going through is really hard. And so the first thing is like, how do I show up in those moments? How can I be more honest with people about what I'm going through, which is really hard? And how can I be maybe more attentive and empathetic to what other people are going through individually and collectively, right? And so I have turned a lot of my personal challenges and struggles into that desire and that commitment to just heal from whatever bad stuff happened to me, but also be more supportive and empathetic for other people. And so it goes back to like early childhood. We had and I've written about this. I call it like being brilliant and broken. On paper, some of the things in my family looked amazing. My dad was a doctor and my mom was a opera singer who then became a homemaker and then became an educator and then became a minister. And um, like on paper, you'd be like, what could go wrong? And the answer was everything. Um, it's just my dad had a lot of struggles, a lot that he inherited from his youth. And as I've gotten older and I've both forgiven and sought forgiveness in the broadest sense, I've come to terms with a lot of his challenges and what their impacts were. But it doesn't change the reality that they impacted our family. We'd go through times when literally they'd buy a house and it'd be an amazing house, and then 3 months later, we're moving because his demons, if you will, his challenges were too great, and we couldn't have stability. And so a lot of my youth was moving. Um, at times we experienced homelessness in the not in the there's no hope homelessness, but in the literal like we've got to move and we don't have a place to move into, and we'd have to stay with friends and family. And I've come to terms with that now, but looking back, that was traumatic. And I don't think I fully appreciated how traumatic it was when, you know, if a cousin just recently shared photos of my mother, my grandmother, my grandparents. I don't have those things, like there's so many elements of when you have a stable upbringing. You might have other problems. There's lots of folks who had a stable upbringing and they have the biggest therapy bills out there. But our unstable upbringing created its own set of problems and challenges. And so the moving around a lot was probably one of the biggest things that, at the time I sort of engaged in, and just kind of, I was an optimist. I've been an optimist since I was a kid. I'm always like, hey, it'll be okay. We'll figure it out. Happy go lucky. And then you realize you're covering up for a lot of bad stuff that just hurts when you pause to feel it. And so I kind of think that that was the biggest sort of foundation of challenge. And like anything else in life, I can either let those things continue to hurt and traumatize, or I can do the inner work I need to do to get to heal from that, to be better from that. And then I think more importantly, do the work that helps me be a positive force in the world. And so, that brings me to more of the adult life. I made a lot of decisions in young adulthood that I wish I could go back. But that's true for most of us. I don't think that that's unique to just being, having a challenging upbringing. I think that's true for a lot of people. And so I've been fortunate that life has given me lots of second chances to just learn, to grow, to lead, to be better. And I'm trying to do that. I'm trying to do that in my family. I'm trying to do that in my community. I'm definitely trying to do that in our work. Because it just gives me, I enjoy it. It feels good. It feels good to make a positive difference in people's lives. It feels good to be vulnerable enough to let other people make a positive difference in yours. And you hit on it. I don't want other people to go through these things. That's probably, I would say that's a good thing, or comes from a good place. But it also means sometimes I'm trying to deny people the experience they need to learn, sometimes through challenge, sometimes through difficulty. And I don't want everybody's lives to be painful by I wish we could take all of our pain away. But that's not realistic. That's not the human condition. That's not the human experience. So, to your word, it's this paradox of acknowledging that this is fundamentally human. And then for those of us who want it to be better, saying, well, what space is there for me to show up in a way that makes it better for at least the humans I'm in interaction with? That's just what I'm trying to do.
Yeah. Talk about the, you mentioned the kind of the experiences that somebody might need. Have you tapped into like the spiritual side of that at all? I just had a conversation yesterday actually about like God's will, and I the kind of the extreme example that I gave kind of in jest a little bit was like, well, if there's two guys and one of them gets run over by a train, so the other one can see this and then say, okay, well, I'm gonna now be a minister and priest and go touch the lives of all these people. It's like, well, did really that guy have to get run over by the train to make that happen? It's like because we don't fully understand what the plan is. Is that something that you've kind of tapped into with with the storytelling and kind of within your own life from that perspective a little bit?
On some levels, I don't have that. I don't see the world that way. I don't see the human experience that way. Partly because I fully admit I don't understand it. I kind of look at it and say, we're here for a moment in time. We seem to be sentient beings that, as far as we can understand it from the inside looking out, we have this concept of will, this concept of morality, and I think I tend to focus less on, so what does that mean in terms of something which we tend to view in a very human way, something out there. I don't think there's something or someone out there pulling strings. That's not how I see life, the universe, or spirituality. But I do think that, you know, we're obviously part of something much, much bigger than ourselves in the sense of like the universe. Like we're just not, sometimes we get so focused on either ignoring that reality or ignoring this reality in favor of that. Like none of this matters because, we're hurtling through space and time and the universe is 14 billion years old and we're only here for 80 years. So what difference does it make? And there's something intrinsic in the human experience that I've seen in humans that says, yes, but. And I rarely say but this is a yes, but moment. Like it's both. We're part of something much, much bigger than ourselves. And we also have a tremendous amount of agency that we need to be responsible for and responsible to. It's not okay for me to just go through life being the worst version of myself and say it doesn't matter because none of us will be here in a million years. That's not okay. And the only reason why I can say it's not okay is because there's something in our human experience that tells us it's not okay. So that's where that's where I tend to focus on it. I
Yeah.
don't see it as a question of, you know, is there something else's will that's governing all this? I see it as what should I do with the choices available to me, with the life that I have? How can I make life better? And if there is something bigger out there, more that has some degree of intention or consciousness, hey, like tap into it. If that's for you, tap into it. If it's not, don't. Neither one of those prevent you from being a better human. And whatever helps you be a better human, you should do that. If
Yeah,
that
yeah,
means
yeah.
connect to something bigger, do it. If that means I don't think there's anything else out there, so I'm going to focus on being a better human here, do that. Either way, just be a better human.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. Um, the moving around piece to me hits a little bit home. We didn't move around houses a lot, but due to where our house was, I switched schools from third grade on to high school, including some like other programs. Let's see, one, two, three, four, like seven schools in 7 years or something like that.
Yeah, I can relate.
Um, so I'm with you there. How did you like what was and I'm maybe I don't know if dealing with it is the right thing because it was still in the same like area and some of the kids were also moving schools with me and that sort of stuff. So but how, like what are some of the things that you like when you went so for me when I went to college I was like okay I'm gonna go to a place where I don't know anybody and I'm just gonna try and reinvent myself. Like when you were in that situation like what was your kind of mindset and how you mentioned some of the inner work that you're doing. Like, what are some of the things that you've had to experience, talk through, um, kind of work on from that sense? Because for me personally, that part hits home a little bit. So,
Yeah.
what are some of those things?
I think if I look back to I have some of the memories are fuzzier when I think about like I have memories of loving brief moments of say kindergarten. I have memories of those. I remember where I was in kindergarten, but I don't remember like my kindergarten year. I don't remember my kindergarten's teacher's name. I don't remember street addresses. I just don't because there's been too many of them. I have like three or four teachers in my entire, high school. I remember a lot of those teachers because high school was a stable time for me. But pre-high school, I mean, I think we moved to your point. We probably on average moved to a different school every school year from kindergarten through ninth grade. So across from New York to Michigan to Oklahoma to back to the New York and New Jersey area. So it's just too much to remember. And so
Yeah.
part of what I think I learned to do was to kind of ignore it as a bit of a like mental survival instinct, like rather than agonize over what I can't remember, just accept that I don't have those memories or they didn't get deeply embedded enough. There were moments that I do sometimes look back on and like it would have been cool if we could have stayed there because I really enjoyed that space and that place and time. Um, like random sensory memories will be like, I remember the smell of the cookies in that cafeteria and those were good. It's just like
They
crazy things
weren't
like
they
that.
weren't cardboard for the only time ever.
That one they were good. They had a good cafeteria in that one school. But then I'd spend like 30 minutes like, was it this or was it that school? Because the edges of the memory are just too
Hmm.
diffuse. And so what I've learned to do is be okay with the memories that do pop up. Remember those, kind of explore those, enjoy them a little bit. I write a lot as you know and you can tell and share more stories as the company's no surprise that me wanting to explore life and experience through my own stories is part of that process. I got to show up the way I want other people to show up.
Yeah.
And so I've kind of explored some of those writings are really just for myself, just to get it out. And some of those is when I relate it, like you said, it can help other people say, I that part resonates with me. But I think the thing that I've probably maybe for better and for worse, I don't know, it's hard to say. It made me very convinced of the need for stability for my kids. And sometimes to the point where you overcorrect, where you try to, grip the steering wheel too tightly because you're used to being in a car where there's never mind nobody's steering, there's no steering wheel. So you get a car with a steering wheel, you're like, I'm driving, I'm holding the wheel, and nobody's getting out till we get to our destination. Like you respond with this need to control. That's what I did. And so, I've got young adult sons and younger kids. We have a blended family, and you know, I think a lot of the decisions I made in terms of creating stability for them were right and have worked out generally well for them. And some of the decisions I made, I look back and I'm like, yeah, I was trying way too hard, especially with my older sons. I was trying way too hard. And so, now I'm trying to find that balance of stability and structure is generally good for a lot of people, but how much they need depends on the person. And I can't assume that they need the same exact type of stability and structure I need because they're not carrying some of the same traumas I'm carrying. They don't have my backpack. So I'm thinking my backpack is the problem. So I need this kind of structure and stability. And they're like, I mean, I hear you, Dad, but I don't have that problem. So I'd be
Yeah.
like, oh, okay. That makes sense when you say it out loud. Like, you don't need the same thing I need because you're not dealing with the same problem I'm dealing with. And then there are things that I can see in common. And I'm like, this might be a heads up. Like, this might be in our emotional DNA. This might be, I passed on some of my thinking and behaviors to you. And maybe you have an opportunity to see that before you become 30, 40, or 50. So, you know, but that's just parenting and fatherhood. And we're in a good place where we could talk about those things. So it's good.
Yeah, you have a good relationship with the older two specifically that you mentioned.
Uh, Amazing. We have a wonderful family life as a whole. My both of my older sons live here in Richmond. They're both on their own. Um, but this idea of what I believe in terms of community of interdependence versus codependence or independence, that's true in our family. Like we're a very interdependent family. We're very much here for each other. My older kids, they come over, if not, probably not every weekend, that's an exaggeration, but they're definitely home at least two, maybe three times a month. And it's beautiful. Like the littles get to hang out with them. There's sort of this intermediate, you know, my youngest and I, we call ourselves the bookends of the family. So there's just it's almost like the bumper sticker, right? It's like boom, 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 boom,
Yeah,
boom,
yeah.
boom, and it makes me happy, but not in a selfish way. Like I am happy to see my family, but I'm really happy that my family gets to be together in a place. I didn't always have that. So again, sometimes I get overbearing with that, and they'll be like, "Okay, here's Dad." I'll be like, "I would love it if everybody could be together on this day doing this thing together." And they'll be like, "Tap the brakes, Chad. We're all good. Everybody's good. You don't have to worry about us." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, you're right. You're right. Everybody's good." It's like the movie, "The
Yeah.
kids are all right. Kids are all right."
Yeah. You mentioned as well that you forgave your father for kind of the whatever vices that he had going on in the situations. How, in terms of how conscious was that from like was it born out of necessity from you from the perspective of like I don't want my family that I'm going to create to have to experience this, or like how was that process
Hmm.
working? Because oftentimes you see this, well, like okay, yeah, this grandfather was this way, and then the father is the same way, and then the son turns into the same way, and then his son is like, all of you are nuts, and then that it's like it's passed on. I think with generational trauma, I think is the phrase
Yeah.
that gets thrown around a lot for it. How was that process for you? Because you can imagine, um, especially with the livelihoods that your parents had, that you'd be like, guys, sort it out, man. Like, come on. But so that would have taken some, and then maybe you feel some, not to project onto you or not even from myself, but just extrapolating on what someone might feel in that scenario is a level of bitterness for like, oh, I didn't have a childhood. And like, so how was that process for you? Did it kind of just come naturally, or was there a very conscious like, no, I need to do this to move on?
Did not come naturally. It took a while. I think I went for a large period. He passed away when I was still in high school, and when he passed away, I had not. It was my senior year. I had not seen him in person for 6 years. We moved from Tulsa back to New York and New Jersey area under a lot of trauma, drama, and stress. And so the last time I saw him was 12 in Tulsa in person. We talked, and the frequency of the conversations lessened, birthdays and Christmas kind of things. Or when I was being a real pain to my mom and be like, I want to go live with my dad, which is the worst thing you can say to the parent who's like sacrificed everything
It's not
to
not great.
to care for you and navigate their drama and trauma of a failed marriage and being a single parent provider. And there were moments I remember she'd be at her wits and she's like, fine, call him. And almost like you could tell her bite her tongue. You could see her bite her tongue. She wanted to say, call him and see what happens. But she didn't. She just said, call him. And I remember one day I called him and I was like, I want to live with you. And it was, I'm remembering this now. And it was like, well, well, what's going on? Well, have you thought about doing this? And there was never yes, please do. Not that there should have been, but there wasn't. And it was a bizarre thing to realize like if he wanted to, he couldn't care for me. And I didn't know if the only difference was whether he wanted to or whether he couldn't. But either way, I wasn't going to go be living with him. And so I remember that. And it still hurts, but I kind of have learned to over time the wounds, if you really go through the healing, they get smaller, they get healed, they scab over, and then you have a scar. And the scar is still there. And so I think forgiveness took a while. Partly because for many years I just didn't think about him. I really didn't. Like he was not a present thought for me. I didn't see him as part of my identity, even though I deeply knew who he was and knew what he had given us and also what he had not given us. Um, then I went through a phase of really blaming him for everything bad that happened in our family, for the hardships, economic and emotional and otherwise. I blamed him for, you know, making things difficult for my mother, for not being there. And then I just kind of moved on for a period of time. I think that's when I did not realize the degree to which not healing from those things was impacting my adult experience as a, husband in my first marriage, as a father. Um, and so probably in the last 5 years is really where I was able to start a process. I started going to therapy and really exploring what it means to navigate the journey I've already been on so that I can navigate the journey that I want to go on. And a big moment in that was my sister. She died in it'll be 3 years in another week and change. She died in June 2022, and she died by suicide. And that was I mean, everything changed. You can define me as before my sister died and after my sister died, and that's not as simple as that. Um, but there's a lot that goes into that moment as just pivotal. Um, and so I also realized there were other things that I wanted to do in my life that to change my life and my behaviors and my actions. And that had already started happening around the same time. I decided I wanted to live a sober life, and that was also in response to some of the things I could see that he had, and I didn't want to spend the rest of my life in that kind of space. Um, but probably more than anything, my sister's death was really the pivotal shift. And then I realized I've got to start working on this. I've got to start healing, forgiving, and embracing the parts that I can embrace and letting go of the ones I can't and moving on so I can be a better version of me.
Makes sense. So at what point did hmm, okay, so you're going through high school. Where is college something that is an expectation, or is it something that you wanted to do? Like if you go to different parts of the country, it's very different. It's like, no, it's just something that you do. And then other people, it's like kind of how it was 30, 40 years ago, where it's like, oh, we got the first person going to college, or that's an
Yeah.
exaggeration, but you know what I mean. And what sorts of things were you looking for? Was it just to get out of town or to get some independence? You meant obviously we talked about crew before. Um, and so the college piece. So I guess we can f go from like the college piece and maybe that stage and then to the founding of the
Yeah.
company. So how are you interacting end of high school? You got your siblings, you got your mom, kind of financially, are you concerned about like, oh, I'm not even going to be able to afford it. Do I even apply? Like, where's your head at that point?
Yeah. I mean, to your point, I love what you said. It's different around the country and it's different in different families. And I think it's a really good point. And I think, oh, by the way, we could spend a whole conversation talking about the educational experience. And I think it's okay for both things to be true, to want to achieve something that you're motivated to achieve, like that part of your education, and to also recognize that for some people, they can have the same kind of impact that they want to have in society and in life without that kind of education.
Yeah.
And we seem to still we're working to close that gap, but it still can feel very um not fully thought through, and so I think sometimes we make people feel a certain kind of way about their experiences rather than embracing, look, do you want more? If so, let's help you achieve more. Are you do you feel good about what you've done and where you want to go? And do you feel like that will allow you to build the life you want? Then do
Yeah.
that. And it depends. And it really is, to your point, so much more complex. In my family, I would say education was always valued. On my mother's side, she was my grandfather had gone, he went to college, went to Howard University, then he went to divinity school in Yale, became a minister. So, there was a lot of education. She was a bit of a prodigy. So she went to Oberlin University and then studied opera and music and finished her formal education and started her career in Europe. My dad was for some parts of his family, especially in the nursing practice, there was formal education, college education, and others there wasn't a lot of um, you know manual labor, meaning those kinds of experiences. He himself, he grew up in an educated family. His immediate family, his mother and his aunt were very focused on, I shouldn't say an educated family, a family that was able to experience formal higher education. That's what I really mean to say. And his aunt was a nurse, and I don't remember if my grandmother went to college, but it was very clear he was the version of what you were saying. Like they were like, "You're going to college." And this is what I mean. Like he had a ton of trauma. The things I learned about his life later, I'm not saying it excused the things he did, but it definitely helped me understand. I mean, he went through a lot. So part of his college was his aunt and his mom putting him in the car one day and driving him down to Morgan State University and saying, "What do you think about this place?" And he was like, "Yeah, it's cool. He's like, it's nice." And they were like, "Good. This is where you're gonna be for the next 4 years. We want you to be alive. We want you to live. Don't come back to Philly until you graduate,"
Mm,
because he wouldn't have made it with not because of like stereotypical neighborhood violence and that. So these are close knit neighborhoods. People, that's not the issue. The issue was in his home. The abuse he was experiencing in his home threatened his life, and so his mom and his aunt were like, "We got to make the sacrifice." So they had been like saving up money on the side, filling out his application
wow.
without his knowledge and getting him into college. So that's what I came into, right? Like I said, brilliant but broken. Like expectations. Well, of course, you and your sister are going to go to college and you're going to go to good schools. Like they always try to put us in good schools and they wanted us to go to college. My mom and I didn't have a lot of conversations about college. I was in a prep school. It was kind of expected. I was like, yeah, I'm going to college. I want to go to college. I applied to two schools, and Princeton was one of them. And I was like, great. I mean, it's simple. Like, I didn't have even the whole drama and trauma about like, what should we do? Where should I go? It was not my experience. Um, I remember having this conversation with my sister once because her high school experience was much more fragmented and frustrating for her. And she was brilliant. She's brilliant. She was way smarter than me and did not get quite the same opportunities I did, even though we were only a year and change apart. And so I remember once I was like, "I'm so happy mom lets us figure this stuff out." And she was like, looked at me like I was crazy. She was like, "That's not good." I was like, "What do you mean?" She's like, she's supposed to help us. She's supposed to tell you what to do. And I was like, "I don't want her telling me what to do." She's like, "I would have appreciated her telling me what to do." And I was like, "What do you mean by that?" She's like, "I had to figure out college on my own. Like I decided I wanted to finish my degree. I decided I wanted to go to NYU. I decided I wanted to get my master's." And then my sister became like a career, well, she wanted a life in education. And she went and got her law degree, did all these things. And I was like, not even long before she died, she was like, "I think I want to be a doctor." I was like, "Stop." And I've talked to other folks who are like, "No, that's for her. You should have encouraged that." And I'm like, "That's your call." I'm just saying, between me and my sister, I saw a pattern of her wanting more and more education. And I wondered, I can't speak for her, I wasn't in her head, but I wondered, is that her way of making up for some of what we lost in our earlier sort of educational journey? Because, on the other hand, you look at it like, look, it shouldn't matter what age you are. If you have a new dream, go for it. I just, I couldn't relate to that, which was odd because I could relate to almost everything my sister went through and vice versa. So that was one where we did not see the world the same. Um, and I think that's because of that. I didn't always take education as seriously as I could. You know, I definitely did not have the straight line journey, but it gave me a lot of experiences that now I find incredibly valuable. I feel like when somebody tells me that they're struggling, I'm like, "I got you. I got a library of struggles. So let me go. Let me pick one. Yeah, let me relate to you on this level. I got you. Let's talk about it." And it also, I kind of I refused to let those struggles prevent me from still achieving not what anybody else expected me to achieve, just what I was internally motivated to achieve. And my whole life, I wanted to be professionally two things: a writer and an entrepreneur. I mean, since I was a kid, I've always wanted to be those two things, and now I am. And so, I'm like a living testament that you can. meander your way through. I started my corporate career in New York, in corporate communications, then brand management, then business development. And, you know, about 10 plus years ago, I had the chance to start this business. And I did. I jumped at it. And it has been hard. It is hard, especially when I went from managing huge brands, even building new businesses in a corporate environment, corporate innovation. It's nothing like building your own company, finding a team, sharing the vision. You got to build culture even with two people. Culture is not for a 10,000 person organization. It's for a team of two. You've got to have shared values, shared behaviors, shared language, shared norms. And so I think in some respects, there were some things from my corporate experience that I had to unlearn completely. There were other things that I didn't have to unlearn them. I just had to put them on pause because they weren't applicable to building a company from start. Now that we've been in business for a while, and now that a lot of our customers are large enterprise customers, like the kind of place I used to work, those lessons of how to navigate companies and cultures from the inside give us a lot of inherent advantage when we're selling to them, when we're delivering our services, because we truly do understand what a lot of our customers go through, the pain points they have of either leading their team or building a brand or figuring out how to increase loyalty or satisfaction. Like I and my teammates had those jobs. And so now those experiences are really, really relevant. And that to me is like the bigger storyline for me is almost nothing that happens to us has to be a wasted experience. It can be as painful, traumatic, and even destructive as you can imagine. And it doesn't have to be wasted. I could want to not have to do it. Trust me, I would much rather not have gone through the hard things, but I went through them. So the question is, can I use that experience or not? And I think sometimes we get stuck wishing the thing didn't happen versus accepting that it did and asking, what can I make out of this experience? Because I think some of us worry, well, then you're justifying it. Not at all. I don't want it to have happened, but it did. And therefore, what can I do with that experience? And so, even in the positive sense, every lesson I learned in my corporate career, now there's a place for it. Even if I didn't a place for it 10 years ago, I could use it today. And there's things I'm learning now that don't feel like they're the most useful lessons, they'll be useful 3 years from now, 5 years from now, or they'll be useful for the team, or they'll be useful for my family when they're in their career stages and they're like, oh, I remember watching dad do this and watching his team build that and watching the stress they went through to launch. I get it now. So it all can be useful if we see it that way.
Yeah. I You mentioned that it's not justifying what happened. I think that's very interesting because um my anecdotal experience has been if you're trying to explain something, then you're trying to justify it. And I have said on the show a bunch of times, especially when dealing with like international events or whatever, that trying to understand and explain is not the same as justifying, but you need to understand and explain the motives of a person or an individual or an organization or whatever, so then you can make a better decision on what you should do. Because if you don't understand why somebody or something is doing whatever it is that they're doing, then how are you going to make a better decision? And I think we also see this sometimes in corporate culture, or maybe even athletics, where it's like, "Hey, why'd you do that?" Instead of trying to explain it, because then it sounds like you're making excuses. You just say, "Oh, sorry," and like, "I'll do better next time," and you move on. And I think that societally, we probably need to find some sort of happy medium, because I find myself at like even at work or whatever, when I say like somebody that I'll be managing, and I'll be like, "Hey, why did you do that?" And I actually want to know.
Yes.
It's not because it's not me dinging you for doing something wrong. It's like what happened that led you to this conclusion, so then it doesn't happen next time. And and to take the lessons learned out of that, I think is actually it's a it's something that I think I don't know if maybe it's a social media thing where everything's like super quick hit and like the critical thinking part is of us as a society has progressively, but like it's interesting because I noticed that in almost all facets of life where explaining something or attempting to explain something, the initial response, like if I try to explain something, my initial response, I always have to caveat it with, I'm not trying to justify this, or I'm not trying to like make an excuse. And I don't really like that, you know?
Yeah.
Because it's if nobody's making an attempt to understand, then how can you get better if you don't understand? Or how can you communicate the next one if you don't understand? Um, do you have a similar experiences with that?
Uh, I totally hear what you're saying, and I agree some of the broader reasons for why that's a problem and why we should work through it. Because at a very human level, we learn from each other's experiences. In an organization, I talk about this all the time. Alignment doesn't mean everybody's in agreement on everything. It means you've decided, you made a conscious decision to say, these are the things I care about. These are the things you care about. There's enough overlap of what we both care about and think is important to our future that we will focus on those things in an aligned way, which means we are acknowledging that there are things we may disagree with even vehemently about, but we have made the conclusion that we won't let those things get in the way of this thing. And that's a process that I think in smaller societies and communities was a little easier to access. It is not new thinking, it's how we have been as humans from our beginnings. It's how villages formed, how tribes formed. I think, as we have expanded as a species and life has gotten more complex and we have more access to things, I think some of those fundamentals of how humans interact and work through difference is we've lost some of that because not every difference has to be a conflict, and sometimes not every conflict is a difference.
Yeah.
It's a lack of understanding, because then when you dive deeper you're like, wait a minute, we actually have the same big picture motives. We disagree significantly about how to get there. Does that give us room to explore together? Yes. But now you're talking about, well, do we have trust as a precondition?
Mm-hmm.
Are we willing to continue to have trust to navigate that? What gives me confidence that I can and should trust this process? So now that's when I think people are like, that's too much to think about, that's too hard, I'll just go the easy way and say you're wrong and move on. And we've got to find ways where we can relearn and repractice that activity
Mm-hmm.
internally and then externally, because it makes space for so much comes out of curiosity. When we talk about people telling their stories, whether they're doing that inside an organization or in the brand or in the community, we talk about three things: authentic, which I know is an overused word, courage, and curiosity. And those three things together actually allow me to both express myself in a way that enables you to understand me, and it also motivates me to seek to understand you. Because I think sometimes the struggle people are having is they aren't communicating their why, and they're leaving people to make that decision on their own. And the other is they're not listening to other people's why, and they're reacting to just the what or the where or the when instead of the why. So you're right on the money when you say why matters. It absolutely matters. That's the whole premise of our work, is that I could know a lot about the who, what, when, and where. And if I don't understand the why, I'm missing a big part of the context of your behavior, your actions, your decisions, a huge part. And a simple experiment, I could take two people in a brand who have the exact same demographics, maybe even the exact same purchase behavior. And then one day, and so if you're the marketer, you're like, oh, great. I can look at the demos and I can look at behaviors and I can predict what's going to happen to both of these people is going to be the same. Then one day, person A stays with the brand and person B goes somewhere else. You're like, wait a minute, I don't understand. The demos were the same, the behaviors were the same, and those led me to believe that they would continue to behave the same way they behaved, as in buy the brand. Why is one leaving? Because their motivations were different. And person B's why is different than person A's. And the minute either that brand no longer satisfies that why, or another brand does a better job of it, they're in pursuit of why. If the barrier is low enough, they're going. But I think that's true in our human interaction. You know, we are motivated by our whys, even if we don't understand them or articulate them. So I'm on a mission to be like, explore your own why, figure it out. Look at your story, look at how you got to where you are. Look, explore and investigate your own Why do I show up this way? Whether you can do therapy or not. If you can't do therapy, you can't afford therapy. There's free resources out there, and the most free one is write your own journal, explore your experiences, think about before you worry about why are they doing that. Start with why am I doing this? Why is my reaction to what they're doing the way it is? Then I can start to investigate. Okay, so my values, because we live in a world right now where I don't even think half the time we're conscious of our own behaviors and values. We're just reacting. We're so reactive right now. And beneath all the reaction is a real meaningful interaction. So I'm more interested in interaction than reaction.
Yeah, I think the reaction piece is super relevant. There's a couple thoughts that I had. One, the reaction piece is super relevant, I think, because there's so many things happening now,
Yes,
like, and we're not wired for that. And so,
correct.
as you're reacting to things, um, you as in people, are your foundational principles grounded enough that your reactions can be based in like a way that is like what are your habits and your foundations? Are they at a spot? Have you spent enough time building those to when you need to react as a necessity to how the world is today? You're reacting in a way that makes sense for the scenario and is logical and there's reasoning behind it, and you've got your basic principles, right? You see this in athletics all the time. When it stresses, like how good are your fundamentals? When you're stressed and when you're tired and when the game's at the end, are your fundamentals good? Because that's like the level that you
Yeah,
fall back to. Um,
yes,
and then on the other kind of thought that I had was the I think a lot of people don't even know their own why, and so they can't articulate it because they haven't thought about it because they're so worried about all the information swirling and they're reacting to all these things that you don't take a step back to like really
yes,
self reflect. And then the third thought that I had off of that was this is why I think the network shows in terms of politics, sports, etc., have gone to this like quick style debate format, like the Stephen A. Smiths of the world and First Take, and every network has got a show where there's just people like I saw a tweet the other day. It was like, kids these days will never know the old Sports Center where they only showed highlights and it wasn't just people yelling at each other. Um, and so I think that's kind of the media, the legacy media has kind of fallen off because I think there's a big chunk of the population that's like, you know what? I don't think these people are talking in good faith. It's not like the trust isn't there. And so I'm going to go to a long form interview or podcast or Substack, right, has now become huge. Um, the opportunity in the market is there for you to start a business like the one that you started, which I know we're like an hour in, and we'll finally get to it. Um, but the opportunity is there for all these other things because people, there's a big chunk of the population that has done some level of self-reflection, and they are not, like you mentioned, in terms of the like the brand, like the behavior they are not satisfied by the options that
yes,
existed, and a lot of these people are motivated and conscientious enough to go, yeah, I'm gonna go do my own thing over here. And that group has then
yes.
formed, and people like me and you are running around like I don't know when the last time that I watched seriously watched any sort of news or cable like network was, and I could imagine probably for you is similar, or at least not often. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think a few thoughts. One, yeah, my viewing habits have shifted. I try to seek out more broadly what I try to focus on, like what is happening, and wherever that may be, I can find that information. And I try to be really intentional about not reacting to literally in an engagement algorithm way, not reacting to every piece of content I see, whether I like it
Mm-hmm.
or don't like it. I rarely engage. I don't believe social is a place to engage. Like, I don't believe the comment section specifically is a place to engage
No,
in
the comment section
dialogue.
is for psychos.
It's just not a place to have a real dialogue because at
No.
this point, half the time you really don't know who you're having. Why should I have a conversation with somebody that I cannot know if I'm who this person is? That's not a conversation.
Or they're not even a
Um,
real person, they're a
they're
bot.
real. That's what I mean. Like in the most little sense, they might not be real, and if they are, they might be adopting a fake persona. And social, to some degree, means we're all adopting some level of a persona, and I try to be conscious about that in my own and be vulnerable, be open, break things down, push through my own fear. Like, ooh, if I say that, somebody's going to react. You know what? I don't care. I mean, I do care, but I need to not care because it's important for me to say it for me. And I know that there's somebody else out there who has told me when you say these things, it helps me. So that's one thing I think. The other thing I think is I'm not obligated to have an opinion about everything.
Hmm.
Now that doesn't mean I should be comfortable being ignorant about everything. Again, we live in these extremes like, you know, either you have to have an opinion about everything or you can be blissfully ignorant about everything. Like, no, the truth is in the middle. No human factually can know everything. So therefore I can't have an opinion about everything. And it's different things stimulate my intellectual curiosity, my emotional connection, my inner reflection, and those things I'm going to go to. Now, if I find myself narrowing what I listen to, focus on, interact with, then I should spend some time asking why is that happening, and how could I shift that? Because again, the curiosity is one of the most prized human traits we have. Our curiosity is what propels us forward. Our curiosity is actually why we decide on some level to overcome a conflict because we're curious about the possibility of if not living in harmony, not living at war with one another. On any, like even on a micro level, we're curious about what might happen, what might my life look like if we're not doing this. And so curiosity to me gets applied to lots of things, including conflict resolution, including listening to people that I think I don't agree with or know I don't agree with, or even have reason to not trust because I think either their actions or their words mean me harm. I'm not going to necessarily put myself in the most vulnerable position all day, every day, but I got to make space for that curiosity to show up,
Hmm.
to ask a question, even if I got to do it in a quote unquote safer way by reading about it versus going into a conversation. Like, I mean, there's some meetings I'm not going to. There's some places I'm not going to because I've
Yeah.
been to a lot of places. I've experienced places where people don't like me and don't like who I am and don't like where I'm from, either because of my identity or my experience or the way I show up. So I don't feel the need to make people hear what I have to say or make people think what I think. Um, I don't have to feel the need to have an opinion about everything. I do feel a need to, I have a human need. I want to be seen and heard, and I want to help other people feel seen and heard. And curiosity means sometimes I need to think about what it's like for people who aren't easily seen and heard. I think that's a good thing, even when it's hard, intellectually hard and socially hard. And it's probably not happening in the comment section on social.
Yeah, no, definitely, definitely not. And YouTube comments mine are the absolute worst. Um, okay, so you go through all these things. Where's the idea for the business started? Is this like, it seems like, based on your story and based on the conversation that we had on the phone a week or two ago, that this was a long time coming, this business. But walk through kind of where's the idea spark from? Did you start it as a side hustle while you were still working in corporate? And then if that is the case, when did you choose to take the leap and be like, nope, I'm not working at corporate anymore? Or did you choose to take the leap immediately? In which case, how did that conversation go with yourself and your family
Yeah.
who you're supporting and stuff?
No, it was a hard transition going from corporate right into to starting the business. The first few months of that were hard because I wasn't sure if I should, I wasn't sure if we had made a mistake. And my spouse is extremely supportive, very much a partner, and I had mentors and advisors who lovingly and firmly explained to me, you know, male or female, when you start a business, you're bringing another child in, and you need to nurture this. So it wasn't a gender based thing. It was just like you and your wife are adding another baby to the family. You have to feed it. You're gonna have to nurture it. You're gonna have to be disciplined with it. All these things that you would have to do with your human children. And at first, I was like, what does that mean? But they were right. Like it costs money, like a kid. All these things, right? So we made the commitment after every time we said, I don't know, if we reach this point and it's not where we want it to be, we'll stop. I'll stop. And honestly, looking back, we've blown through every one of those gates, which tells me we're in it, we're committed, and she is too, because it would have been easy for her to say, you know, you could be doing this, especially in the early years where we had to make a lot of sacrifices. You could be doing this, and we could be living this, and so on and so forth. When I started the business, the company, 2014. At that point, I really felt like the opportunity was to create a better social media experience. I thought social was already broken then. I was like, this is already becoming a place where on this platform, at most 10% create and 90% consume. And that is when it went from a social network to social media. It really was media. It was not networking. It was not connection. And so I was like, I'd rather be in a place that's more community, more connection, where there's more exchange, and stories became the thing. Our early prototypes, though, were geared on helping people like me at the time, frustrated writers who wanted to get their stories out into the world. So we were exploring what this collaborative writing process could look like and what tools a aspiring or frustrated writer needed. And I can't even tell you exactly the moment where it shifted from trying to help people become the writer they wanted to be to just helping people share the stories that they wanted to share. And that opened it up because now we weren't talking about people who saw themselves as a writer, frustrated or not. Everybody's got stories to tell, lots of stories to tell. And so then it was like, okay, at that point, my mentors and advisors were like, this is a great idea, but it's just an idea. It's not a business. How are you going to make this a business? And I was coming out of the old school tech mindset. Like I say old school now, like build it and they will come, monetize later, just build audience, just build user. And they were like, that's not how business works. I was like, but that's how tech works. And they were like, no, it actually doesn't. There's a lot of reasons why that's the myth, but you don't have the time or capital to explore those. So it became clear that we had to figure out in that idea, that vision of helping people express their stories and get their stories out into the world, we had to get clear on what's the business model. And so the business really became a case of saying, how do you connect either in an organization or as a brand or as a community? How do you connect and learn from stories? And the learn piece kind of happened almost by accident because a customer told us, I love the engagement, but I'm really trying to better understand these people, either my team or my customers. And to us, that's insight. Whether you call it research or you call it learning or you call it engagement, that's insight. Back to your earlier comment, when I can better understand why people are doing what they're doing, if my intentions are to make their experiences better, I need to know that. And so that's really what put us on that path of using stories to explore people's experiences, and then gradually as we were doing that in lots of like very high touch, warm, touchy feely workshops, some of our customers were like, these are great, how do we scale them? And we're like, yeah, we're working on a platform. And then COVID hits and we don't think we have a business anymore. But one of our customers is like, can we do the workshop on Zoom? This was before Zoom was ubiquitous. And we were like, sure, we'll figure it out. And in one weekend, we took what had been a in-person workshop that was 3 hours long and turned it into these SEEQ sessions on Zoom. And then we built from there, and then we built the platform, and then we were able to go to our customers and say, well, you don't have to only listen to people at this point in time in this space and place. We can collect stories from your employees and customers wherever they are. And that's where we're at today. And along that journey, though, I've had some really, really critical teammates, partners, mentors, um, and one of our partners, an investor, like gave us the runway. I brought Share More Stories. We made a partnership deal, helped him build out the brand side of his agency. He helped me build out Share More Stories. And so you sometimes you got to look in different ways, like how do we find runway? How do we get to the next milestone? How do we keep building what our customers want? How do we get creative when resources are constrained? How do we use partnership and collaboration? How do we build trust so that when things are tight, your team is still like, no, we're in it. We're going together. We see what we're building. We want to build it together. We're going to get through this valley together. Um, those are the things I've experienced in this journey. I'm deeply, deeply grateful for it because it's brought us to a new foundation where now we're really ready to take even a bigger leap forward and help even more companies and organizations in what we do.
So when a company reaches out, like what sorts of things are they looking for? Like,
Yeah.
so the name of your company is fairly self-explanatory, but in terms of like I'm the director of whatever, and
Yep.
I want you guys to come in and help with a workshop or whatever. What is it that you guys are doing or helping with? Like what's the I guess what's the sales pitch a little bit
Yeah,
or like but like what is it like that you guys do in terms
yeah,
of on the ground, I'm in your Zoom call, I'm in your workshop, like what's going on in there?
yeah. In the most fundamental level, it is what companies are really seeking is ways to increase their impact, either in the organization, in the brand, or if they're a mission-driven company in the community. And if that's their belief and motivation, we're working backwards from there. Then we're saying, do you have the customer experience you need to deliver that outcome? Do you have the employee experience you need to deliver that customer experience? Do you have the leadership you need to deliver the employee experience you want? And gradually, as we like to say, we're working upstream. So when companies come to us, they're typically coming with a specific problem, like, hey, employee engagement is down, or our customer satisfaction and brand loyalty has leveled off, or we're actually seeing a dip. So they're reacting to problems that they see in their existing data about two very fundamentals, right? Our employees engaged and our customers satisfied. That's usually our starting point to unpack more specifically what's the problem. And sometimes we unpack that literally in the discovery sales process. And sometimes that's part of their experience with the platform is learning, oh, we thought it was a customer experience problem. It's actually an employee experience problem. But we thought it was an employee experience problem. It's actually a leadership gap. And so when those customers come to us with that kind of a not surface level, but they're sort of talking about the symptom, not the cause. We just have to go through it with them and figure out, are they open to us diagnosing that now and getting them off to a better start? Or do they have to experience a little bit of that diagnosis? Like I've been with a health provider, and we didn't know what was wrong with me. So we knew we were going to be on a discovery journey. He said it at the very first meeting. He's like, this will take a year to figure out what's wrong. So that's great, but other cases, my expectation is you're going to know the answer right now. So,
Yeah.
help me figure that out so I can get better. I don't have a year to figure this one out. And so sometimes that's where our customers are at. They're like, well, that's great, but I just want to improve marketing and messaging, or I just want to improve, employee engagement in this particular department. And so that's when we have a choice to make. Do we think we can help them with that very specific problem, or not? And I would say, honestly, most of the time, those customers, they kind of opt themselves out of being in our sort of ideal customer profile in our target market, because the customers we attract are really committed to making their organization and their brand and their impact better. They really are. And I think that that market is gradually expanding. We compete as an offering, we compete in this intersection between research, specifically qualitative research, tools and methods, and what's called experience management. There's a lot of, a few big companies in that space, and there's lots of much smaller startups, tech companies. But this intersection between insights into people's behaviors and decisions and experience management, that's really a growth space. And our platform is perfectly tuned to that, because we're using stories to understand experiences, and we're using AI to map those experiences. And that's not new for us. We've been doing that since 2016. So, we've gotten to a place where we have what we call a real big window of relevance, where our customers are telling us, this is exactly what I need. My employee engagement is not telling me why. It's just telling me where. I need you to help me figure out why. My NPS is down, but I don't know why. I need SEEQ to tell me why. And we weren't having those conversations 5 years ago. It was more trying to, like, you're almost at the verge of like a solution in search of a problem. And we knew there was a much bigger problem. We had not tuned it to be clear about that problem. And I think the biggest problem that customers are facing today is, how do I improve employee engagement? How do I improve customer satisfaction and loyalty? And then our job is to help them understand why you're not having that and what you can do to improve it.
So, okay, so I'm the director of whatever. James, my employee engagement is very low. What are we doing about it? And
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
you
So,
go for it. Like, what do you do?
yeah. So we will come in and the first thing we do is we ask, well, what do you think is driving that employee engagement, one way or the other, just so we have a little baseline of where their level of understanding is. We ask them why it matters to them. You'd be surprised. Some will be like, well, because we need it. That's not a good enough answer. Do you believe and understand the role of employee engagement in your organizational culture? And Guess what? If your business is growing, you could have a really sucky culture and be growing. It's going to be hard to convince you should do something about that. If you are in a business or a market where it's early, those differentiators don't make a difference. What you're selling is what people want. Maybe it's a fad, maybe it's a trend. It's easy to say, well, if we're growing volume, why should we worry about things that don't seem broken? But if you're in a mature industry or a mature company, you've probably eked out all the low hanging fruit to drive growth. Now you've got to deal with the real meaty stuff, your brand and your culture. So we asked some of those questions up front just to get a baseline. We call that the learning roadmap. What are you trying to solve for, big picture? And then what does that mean in terms of what we need to know or learn to help you solve that? That drives what we call a prompt. And the prompt for us is we're prompting on the front end. We're asking your employees or your customers to share stories about their experiences, either working for you or with your brand or product, so that we can analyze those stories to figure out what kind of experiences they're having and how we make them better. And so once we have that learning roadmap, we have our platform. We set up a project in the platform in SEEQ, and then we invite your employees or your customers to that project. Sometimes we're doing more of a traditional research-based approach where we are screening and recruiting participants before they participate because it needs to be a research-based approach. When it's more of an experience-driven approach, it's more like, let's make sure it's a representative of our organization versus I only want to talk to people who work here, or there. When we're working inside the organization, we're partnering with the company to push this out to their teams, and then their teams come to the platform, respond to the written prompt, write a story, and submit it. We're adding voice, and eventually we'll do video, but video adds a whole other dimension to how people express themselves. They start to focus a lot on what they look like, and even with voice, they focus a lot on how they sound, and they want to do second takes, third takes. So we're working through what that means in the user experience. But right now, they write and they share very openly their experience. It's not a survey. This is like having a conversation, a one-on-one with 500 employees, one-on-one, and asking them, tell me about your experience. This is like talking to 1,000 of your customers and being like, if the CEO could go talk to each of them, at their kitchen table, or run on the treadmill next to them while they're working out, or sit in the seat on the plane next to them while they're flying and say, I'm here to listen. Tell me about your experience. That's what SEEQ lets them do. And so those stories come in, we're quantifying the emotions of those stories. We're looking across all the stories and identifying the big themes. What are people experiencing? How and why? And then we're developing really actionable ways to solve that, to make that better. That's called an engagement framework. And it's instead of just sort of academically saying, what's the journey map here? They tell you their journey. Our job is to translate what they're telling us into the journey that they're having, either the positive, aspirational journey that you want all of them to have, or the frustrating, broken journey that some of them are having that you need to fix. And that's an employee journey or a customer journey. And both of those come directly from the stories. So when we give you a framework, it says not only like, it's not just recommendations, it's here are the key moments in their experience that you have to get right. If you get these right, you will have more of these positive experiences that lead to happy employees, happy customers. If you don't do these, you're going to have experiences that look like these negatives: low trust, high anxiety, whatever those may be. And that's how we deliver value to the customer.
Hmm. Then what? So AI is used to aggregate them and then gotcha. So yeah, speaking of the video and the audio, yeah, the first couple episodes I was like, oh my gosh, it's just yeah. So it takes time to get used to it. I used to listen to them back and then I stopped because every time I was like kicking myself about, oh, I should have asked this or not asked that or asked this in a different way. And then I'd be worried about it the next time, and I was like, I just have to
I
go.
agree
And
with you. I
if it
agree
works,
with
it
you.
works. Oh, I had another thought and I forgot what it was. Oh, do you have a way to mitigate like if an employee is worried about backlash or retaliation if they
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's such a big part of what we do. And frankly, that's why the platform actually works better than when we were doing the workshops and sessions, because they have that total privacy. When they come in, they do register and then they're immediately given an anonymizing user ID that never carries, their name does not travel with them. Their new user ID does. And some users go in and change that because they're like, I don't have anything to hide, but most stick with the anonymous user ID because like it's automatically assigned, it's randomly generated. And so that level of anonymity and privacy gives them a lot of freedom. We knew from the jump 10 years ago, the biggest things we had to overcome in this journey of getting people to share more stories was fear of being vulnerable, fear of loss of privacy, um, and and fear of, I would say, judgment. Is what I have to say good enough? And so we spent a lot of time in those early in-person sessions. We didn't know we were doing product development, um, but we were doing product development because we were working through how do you help this person get comfortable sharing their story in a room with sometimes strangers, which actually is for some people easier versus people that they know. And we would tell you, like, you put us in a room with our SEEQ session, 2.5 hours later, we're going to have people who did not know each other or did not want to be vulnerable with each other relating across their differences, relating across finding commonalities they did not know they had. So then it was like, how do we turn that into a platform based experience and make it scalable? Well, the first thing is make it easy for people to feel like my identity is secure. I can be private. Great. We give them guidance like, don't treat this as like where you should disclose, your trade secrets because no place in the world is safe like that. It's digital. But you really want to recognize we put a lot of structure, a lot of security, a lot of stability in this platform. It is the most important thing we think about is trust and security. So, if you're thinking about that worry, no, we've got you covered there. Then we walk you through how to think about your story because I'm not facilitating you. So you need to be able to interact with a product that says, hey, first just think about this topic. So it literally gives you a space to think and jot down a couple of thoughts. Then it says, hey, what do you remember? Who were you with or what were you doing? So it just gives you some little visuals that allow you to start to remember or access the memory. Then it says, what do you remember smelling, tasting, touching, or hearing? It literally prompts you to select some suggested senses. By now, you are fully engaged in your memory of that experience. You're not thinking about, I'm not a good writer. I'm not a storyteller. I don't remember what happened 5 years ago because I can't remember what happened this morning. Actually, you can remember what happened 5 years ago, in some cases, even better than what happened this morning when you tap into like the memory. And so when you get to that point, you're just ready to write. And these folks will, you know, we have sometimes a minimum of 150 words. They might write 800. Some have written like 1,500. And it's not taking them a day. They're doing it in like 40 minutes because they have that much to say to that company about what it was like to work there or that company's brand. So what we found is, I mean, people would write us after projects to say thank you. I've done a lot of research in my career. I never had people thanking me for the research. Like for thank you for letting me take this survey. Said nobody.
Yeah.
But thank you for making my voice heard. We get that feedback often from
Hmm.
participants. And that's huge. That takes us right back to the purpose of doing the work and helping a company hear something that they don't hear because they're not asking the right kind of question. They're asking questions to validate what they already know and believe to be true instead of focusing on what is it that I need to know from your perspective. What is it that you haven't had a chance to tell me because I'm not asking you, because I'm forcing you into this survey, or I've got my script and I'm not deviating from it. What do you want to tell me? So the open story allows those users, those customers and employees to really express themselves. And they do.
Hmm. So when you're going after like the customer satisfaction piece, how do you get customers? Do you use companies like email lists or marketing kind of things to gather people?
Yeah. So you mean how do we get participants or how do we find our customers?
How do you find participants? Like if they're
Yeah.
searching for to increase
Yeah.
like customer satisfaction or whatever.
Yeah. It varies. There's different ways of recruiting participants. Some of them are very traditional research based. So, if you are a researcher, you already have a large database, that's your first thing. So we do that too. We go back to our existing pool of users if they fit the general criteria, and we will invite them to either fill out a screener or if it's an open study to just participate.
Hmm.
Um, if there are certain criteria though, which is true for most structured research, you generally have to recruit and screen for it. So we have a tool that allows us to do that. And there's ways to push out open recruits either on social or via email or paid digital to like large audiences so that you're doing essentially to the client line recruitment. The client should not know if it's research. They should not know fundamentally who is responding, because then bias gets introduced and trust becomes a question. But moving beyond traditional research, the EX employee experience and CX customer experience work is we're trying to actually pierce the veil and say you should be hearing from your employees and your customers. Now, I don't want you to know that John Smith, who works in this department, said this, but I want you to know that you're talking to your employees, and I want your employees to know that this is the place they can talk to you. So that's where we partner with the client to recruit from their organization or from their customer base. And that means we will give them the communications and the messaging, and they'll push that out on an internal e-blast, or we'll give them the communications and they'll push it out to their customer database or a specific cell, a specific, send this to 30,000 so we can get X%, whatever that sort of logistical requirement is, which we've thought about in advance. That becomes the way we recruit their participants into the SEEQ project.
Yeah, makes sense. Is there anything that I haven't asked you that I should have or that people generally want to know?
No, you've been it's been incredible to have this conversation. I've watched and listened to some of your episodes, and what I loved about them was you have a structure, but you don't have a preconceived notion of what you can discuss. And I think that's curiosity, like in perfectly demonstrated. So I had no idea really what to expect, and I
I
love the
didn't
way
either.
you brought me back to like my childhood. I was like, oh wow, okay. But I'm here for that. Like that's how I like to show up. So I love that part. And I think the only thing that maybe we talked about in all those moments, but I want your viewers and listeners to hear me say it because it's really about them. It's why I do this is because I believe deeply in the power of human connection. I believe deeply in the power of human understanding. And I believe deeply in the power of us sort of learning things about ourselves and others that can make us better. So I'm on that journey. I think we should all be on that journey. I don't, whatever you're doing, however you're doing it, whether you're in for profit, nonprofit, government, community, whether you're in sports, entertainment, brand management, whatever your background is, whatever you're doing, like you should do that for yourself, for your teams, for your the people you consider in your family, for your customers. That is really how we make this lived experience, these 80 years or so that we got. That's how we make the most of them.
Yeah, 100%. That's a great way to close it out. If people are interested in learning more or kind of going to support you guys, where should they go?
Yeah, I'm all over LinkedIn. So you could find me, my handle on LinkedIn is James-Warren-Seek. But you could look me up on LinkedIn. That's where I spend a lot of my time having conversation. But our websites are sharemorestories.com. That's our overarching website. And if you want to learn more specifically about the SEEQ platform, just go to seekplatform.com. It'll bring you into the Share More Stories site, but it's an easier way to remember where to go. So that's SEEQ platform.com, or sharemorestories.com. Either way, you'll get to the right place, and drop us a note or an email, and or read all the things that I like to talk about, which are all over the place. And be great to connect.
Yeah, awesome. Well, for those listening, those links will be in the description as always. James, I appreciate your openness and your time today. I really enjoyed the conversation. And for those listening, check the links out, and we will see you guys next time. Peace. Thanks for tuning in to the World XP podcast. If you want to watch another episode like this one, click there. If you want to subscribe, click there.